So yes, I am Alicia Edgecombe. I'm married to Richard Edgecombe. He is a pastor at Christchurch Cascades, and I feel very privileged to be with you today. I was quite overwhelmed when Felicity asked me to come and share my testimony. I actually think it's probably easier sharing a talk than a testimony, or it has been for me. I'm an English teacher, so I'm used to speaking, but there's something very personal about sharing a testimony. So I must say, I think I was given, there are two things that I have that I feel God has given me. One is confidence. I generally am a confident person. And the other thing is a sense of humor. And in preparing this, I think I've been very nervous and crying all the time. So, the great humbler as well. But I am hoping that today that this message that I have for you and through my story will encourage you. That my story is one of very ordinary people teaching me about a very extraordinary God. And sometimes I think as Christians, we feel that we've got to be these extraordinary people to do something for God. But if you actually think about the people who have made the biggest impact on your life, I can tell you now it is probably not going to be the major preachers. I can tell you now that it's probably not going to be the people who had fancy dressed, were fancy dressed or had amazing careers. And even I who feel like I'm studying something so exciting, I know no one's actually going to read any of my articles. Not one of you is going to read my PhD. And when I die, no one's going to remember my name. I know that, Actually, the things that impact us are the very ordinary. And isn't it amazing that we have an extraordinary God that makes himself so knowable to very ordinary people and uses us as part of his extraordinary plan for the world? So that is my hope for you today as you listen to my very ordinary story, that you will see the extraordinary God that is written on every single page of my life and your life as well, whether you're sitting here as a Christian or not. He is writing your story. He's brought you here, and he is working powerfully through the very everyday decisions that you make. So before I start, I'd just like to pray. Father God, I just thank you so much that although you are so wonderful, so marvelous, too wonderful for words, Lord, that you make yourself known to such ordinary people, that you work through the very ordinary events of our lives to make yourself intimately known to us, that we can know you and that we can call you Father. What a privilege that is, Lord, and help us to press into that, knowing that we have a God that is for us and who loves us and cares for us. In Jesus' wonderful name we pray. Amen. So I am very grateful that I have always seen the compassion of God in my life. You might look at my name and think, where does that come from? It is Greek. I was actually born into a Greek family in Zimbabwe, Harare. My mother is Zimbabwean. My father is Greek and not a believer, though. Although he attends church all the time to this day, he is a chanter in the Greek church. And if you know anything about, if you've ever been to a Greek service, you'll know that it's all liturgical. They're 3-hour-long services and all sung. And so I was very much brought up with religiosity, but not really having a firm grasp on what it actually meant to have a personal relationship with God. My parents as well were just very ordinary people. And when I say this, I am the very typical daughter of a Greek father who owned a tea room, a corner shop, where they worked every single day, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day was my parents' existence. And mine was that I had to help there. That was just the reality. And so on the weekends, I went to their shop and I packed the shelves and priced goodies and helped customers. And when my parents opened a laundry, I folded laundry. And so that was just very normal. It's just what was expected. My mother, and I'm very grateful for this, is an incredibly disciplined woman. And so, although we were not churchgoers, because that was just the reality of our family, my mother read the Bible to us every night, and we were expected to pray, because that's what you do when you bring up children. I'm grateful for that, because I, even as a young child, had a very firm understanding that there was a God and he required something from me. But very much it was a moral understanding that I just had to be a good person. In God's grace, we didn't live in Zimbabwe very long. My father took us back to Greece because he wanted us to grow up in Greece. And when he was there, he was very depressed. They owned a restaurant there, and that was, again, 7 days a week, 12-hour days. And so, I was just in preschool, actually at a communist preschool where I learned communist songs. Okay. And no one in my father's family is Christian. In actual fact, I can only name one Greek that is in our circles that is a Christian. And so I was not surrounded by Christians at all. In fact, very anti-Christian ideas. But God put on his heart to come back to Africa. He just absolutely hated being in Greece. And I say that is by his grace, because he brought us here to South Africa, to little Durban, where he again opened a little shop. Do you see the story where we all had to live spent all my time? But I went to a preschool where there was a little girl, Melanie, who came from an incredibly Christian family. They were unbelievably devout. And what happens when you're unbelievably devout? You force your child to go to Sunday school, and your child does not want to go. She was a very shy little girl, and I was a very confident little girl. And so what her mother did, probably not even knowing, just in the ordinary course of her life, said to her, why don't you take Aliki along, and then you won't feel so scared to go to Sunday school? So I could not have been more excited, because that meant that Sunday I didn't have to go to my parents' shop. It meant that I could go to Sunday school, and I really actually wanted to go, because if your parents don't take you to church, where do you want to go? Church. And so they used to pick me up, and I remember even just getting ready every week. The most exciting part of my week was getting picked up by this family for them to take me to church. And as a result, I grew up in the church because of them, not because of my own family. And so much so, and I actually still feel so emotional about it, but that everyone in the church thought I was one of their children. Their grandmother actually introduced me as their granddaughter. And and I even remember the impact that she made on my life in terms of phoning me constantly, saying that she was praying for me. Even as an old lady, when I used to phone her and she used to complain about all her ailments, and at the end say, but you know what? Jesus is with me, so I never complain. You cannot believe the extraordinary impact that makes on a young person who is not brought up in a Christian home. And so if you are sitting here and you're in the elderly camp and you think you have nothing to offer a young person, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 21-year-old, it cannot be further from the truth, because I stand here today because an ordinary grandmother pulled me into her family, prayed for me, told people that I was her granddaughter, and introduced me to a marvelous God just through the very ordinary aspects of her life. I didn't come to faith because, and as much as Tim Keller has done incredible things, I didn't know Tim Keller. But I knew Granny Elaine in her awkwardness, in her fumbliness, in her jovial way. I knew her, and she knew God, and she knew Jesus, and just through her ordinary life was able to share that with me. So I could see, even as a young child, this God was marvelous, and I wanted to know him. And so when I just see that just being displayed, even in Corinthians, where it said, 1 Corinthians, Paul says, where is the wise man? Where's the scholar? Where is the philosopher? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of this world? Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. And he goes on to say, when I came to you, brothers, I did not come with eloquence or superior wisdom as proclaimed to you, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about Jesus. I came to you in weakness and fear and with much trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on men's wisdom, but on God's power. And I cannot say that how true that has been in my life, that actually just the ordinary work of Christians declaring the truth of the gospel is what does the extraordinary work in our hearts to turn us to Christ, because it is his power that saves us. It is not any eloquence or wisdom that comes from man. The irony is that I was born into the Greeks, the Greeks looking for wisdom. But yet, wisdom apart from God is just foolishness. We only serve, we are the ones that serve the only wise God. And I think the more that you study, doing my doctorate, that's what I've actually realized the most, is that I actually know very little. I think the more you read, the more you know how little you know. And you're just so thankful that God is wise and you realize he is the only wise God. So as I was growing up in this, like I said, part of this very Christian family, I was very grateful that I actually managed to convince my mother to come to church. So do you see the outreach of one family inviting a child ends up that another comes to church? So my mother started coming to church instead of going to the shop. And she actually has her own testimony to tell in terms of really being a changed woman. But as I entered into high school, it's another part of just very ordinary going into high school. My parents, I never realized that we were kind of the working class individual, because I went to a primary school where everyone was like me. My friend Melanie's parents were in the same kind of economic bracket. But I was a very academic child, and so I got a bursary to go to a beautiful Model C school in Durban North. We were in Morningside. And that was the first time I realized that I was actually a little bit embarrassed of my parents, because suddenly I went to a class where the people around their parents were a little bit more professional. They were teachers or doctors or lawyers. On the weekends, they went out. They went on holiday, and that was not my existence. I went to the shop and I folded laundry and I had to help out there. And I was actually quite embarrassed. And it was very humbling for me, though. And I was grateful to teachers. If you're a teacher, you're on full-time ministry. Because there were teachers there that could see when they were going around, and I don't know why they asked what our parents did anyway. I've actually always been very sensitive of that now that I became a teacher. But they saw that I kind of like avoided the question because I didn't want to tell them. Actually, my parents own a little corner shop down in Durban, and we, that's where I go fold laundry on the weekends, and no one pays me. That's just what you're expected to do. Getting paid to do work. These other kids are like pulling some weeds out of the garden. Their parents are paying them for that. I was like, they pay you to do stuff? This is an expectation where I was. And gee, if you even tried, my parents used to show me their hands. Like, look what we do for you, like you want us to pay you more for this. So, but I had teachers who were Christian who actually really helped me to understand that I should be incredibly grateful for what God had given me and very grateful for what my parents were doing. But they also, in the midst of that, I really wanted to hear from God more because I was insecure. Now, I didn't actually know what I had to do. All these people had all these options in front of them I didn't have. Like, how is God actually personally going to speak to me? And so I went on this great journey of trying to go like, God, please show me what I should study, or what should I do about this, or what should I do about that? And I'm really feeling massively insecure. It was only actually when I went to high school when I went to varsity, that I really started understanding how much I had to root myself in Christ and Christ alone, that I didn't have to actually worry about what my parents were like, whether they were, well-to-do or not well-to-do. In fact, I'm actually very proud of my parents now. But at the time, how so much of that undermines what you feel about yourself and who you should be relying on. So I was grateful for that, because by the time I got to varsity, I understood what Matthew was saying, and what Jesus was saying in the story of the wise man. He says in this parable, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against his house, yet it did not fall because its foundations were on the rock. And part of my struggle in understanding really on how to put my faith in Christ was so much that although I had these great Christians in my life, I actually did not know how to study the word for myself. I kind of was reliant on them to tell me about him. And so the thing is that your faith then flounders because you don't really know the reliability of God outside of what other people tell you about him. And so much of my experience then in high school into early varsity was kind of going, do I need to sign from God? And I remember someone telling me, no, what you do is you ask, if you have a question of God, you just ask him, and then you open up the Bible somewhere and, you read a random verse and, that's what he wants you to know. And I kind of relied on that because, I wasn't taught any better at home and was really struggling to find my place in a school and in a society that I didn't feel I perfectly fitted. My experience of life was so different to these other girls around me. And even their trajectory in life was I felt so different to my own. And so I really wanted to press into a God that I didn't feel like I knew. And the thing is with that, is that things come falling down when you rely on your own abilities. And so by the time I got to varsity, I actually had lost a lot of my confidence. And I had almost, my faith in God had almost really, it was on very shaky ground. Because I just really thought, well, I'm asking God all these questions, but I just don't know if this is really giving me the answer. Again, in very ordinary means, and I'm very grateful to God for this, my same friend Melanie was in varsity with me, and she had heard about something called the Bible Talks, which is something Andy is part of, or TBT, you might have heard of TBT. And going to TBT, she didn't actually stay at TBT because it wasn't emotional enough for her, so she wanted the emotional experience that we were all after. But I was over that, and I actually wanted something very solid, and I wanted to know God for who he was. And I had seen the real relationship I'd seen in others, and I wanted that for myself. I desperately desired that for myself. So I went along, and may I say, a very ordinary place, kind of musty. If you're at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, one of those back varsity rooms, full of students I didn't know, very unimpressive sound. And I must say, no offense to the minister, very unimpressive preacher. Nothing exciting. But he opened up and he started reading from the Word of God. And I take you back to 1 Corinthians. He just preached Christ crucified. Very simply, very basically. And he told us all in that room that we were all sinners. And it's not something I didn't hear before. I'd understood that Jesus had died for me, but I hadn't really grasped that I needed him. And I don't know why that was. Why is it that I didn't understand that aspect of him? Even though I was so desperately calling after him and wanting him. But part of that is actually a humility that you need when you come to the cross. A humility that really, it is only on him and what he has done. And I think so much had been sort of drilled into me as a young person of morality and working hard and going to high school and kind of feeling a little bit insecure because you kind of feel like, I'm this person who works on the weekends and all these other people got fancy holidays and everything else. And that insecurity that comes with it, but actually realizing it really, none of that actually really matters. And it's all based on what Jesus has done and that he has been crucified and crucified for me personally. So I was telling you about entering into TBT, and I can say that that very average sermon that really hit into my heart about the fact that we have this wonderful King who was able to come to earth, to humble himself, to die on a cross for my sins. It really sunk in a way that was powerful. In a very ordinary moment, an extraordinary thing happened. And so I kept going to TBT. And I think the thing about a Christian life, it is not one moment that changes us. It's every little thing. And the wonderful thing about, now I feel like I'm punting TBT, but maybe I am a bit. They taught me how to read the Bible. And I can't tell you how liberating that was, because in the insecurity, and like I was saying, I think it's quite common for, say, a teenager, an early woman to feel insecure, but I don't want to be insecure in how to hear from God. And I think that was a real problem. And yet suddenly when someone is able to say, no, do you know what, Riki, you just have to open it and actually read a whole book at a time. And suddenly I was like, oh, I can read this in context. I knew how to do that. I was an English teacher, and becoming an English teacher and a lawyer. I was studying law. Someone being able to come and show me that the grand scheme of the Bible was all about this wonderful love story between God and his people. And that how everything was working from this, that God had made a perfect world, a very personal God. And actually, I encourage you to reread Genesis chapter 1 to see what a personal God we serve, one that created everything, looked at everything and saw it was good, named it. He was intimate and involved from the very beginning, that this world is an absolute chaos and he is going to return us back to that restored state of being in complete, with complete perfection and have a good relationship with him, perfect relationship with him. That understanding was something that I did not have in terms of the bigger picture of what God was doing. And so it absolutely took over my life, so much so my parents were a bit worried because I was then going to every Bible study I could. I was then evangelizing on the varsity campus and try and evangelize a bunch of law students. They used to turn around and say, no, Leahy, that's for the poor people. It's not for us. So give them hope, because their lives are sad and sorry. It's not like us. And the thing is that the irony is that they're right. It is for the poor in spirit. And if you will not come to him humbly, it is not for you, actually. So they didn't realize that they were actually saying the truth. But so I started getting very involved. To my parents' dismay, I think at one point they even took my car keys away because I was going to evening, Bible studies at the university campus, which was actually really was quite dangerous. But, you don't think about it at 21, just so that I could be equipped to be able to share the word. And so that has become the passion of my life. And even as a full-time teacher, I always say to my husband, I'm in full-time ministry. If you're a teacher, you're in full-time ministry. If you deal with people, you're in full-time ministry because you are always sharing your life with others. And like I said, very ordinary people have made that impact on me. And throughout my walk with Christ, what has so come to me is his humbling nature, that in our relationships with one another, Paul says, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. You know, we're not obedient to death. We're slaves to death. We know we're going to die, right? But we have a God that himself humbled himself to obedience to even death for me and for you. And so I've very much drawn on that in my pursuit of knowing him more, because it is a journey of knowing him more. I must say that it has not always been an easy journey. Like I said, I have been in with my husband in ministry. Those haven't always been easy years. But what I have tried to hold on to is, as it says in Colossians, that just as I've received Christ Jesus as Lord, that I want to continue in him, rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith, as I was taught, and overwhelming with thankfulness. As Tisha said, that's not always easy, especially when things are hard. And there's so much actually I wanted to share from my story now that I hope would be an encouragement to you. And like I said, a very personal part of my story. So part of coming to know him and rely on him and being rooted on him is that often you are challenged in areas that you have to really consider, what are you relying on and what are you rooting yourself in? In 2016, Richard became very ill. He had complete burnout from ministry, and he had to step down for a while he recovered. It was just from the stress of being a young minister and feeling the pressure of feeling really responsible for the people in his congregation, not remembering that it is God's work, not his own. And in that time, I had to pick up a lot of the pieces of that. And I was traveling down to Durban, and I myself became very sick. So much so that I actually forgot how to drive my car. I couldn't drive it anymore. That's how ill I became. I couldn't tell if it was a red robot, if I should go or I should stop. And it became a great concern to me. And so I myself found myself flat on my back, very unwell. In the midst of that, it turned out my husband was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which is something that you would normally pick up in a child, not in a man in his 30s. But we had never had children, and so it was just part of the test that we had done. And so suddenly I was there unwell, and I really enjoy working. I know some people don't, but I love it. And being unable to actually work very much, and Richard being unwell, and now having these massive things to come to terms with of, is he going to be well going forward? By God's grace, he was fine unto that point, other than minor illnesses. And then obviously sort of the disappointment of maybe never being able to have a family of our own. And I remember coming back from all of these tests, and we'd actually spent basically most of our money just on tests. I mean, if you've ever been sick and had to go for tests, just one thing after another, and you think, I've worked so hard just to save this little money because I just wanted my own family, and I was going to stay home and look after my children. I'd actually spend most of it on tests, on medical tests. And I was incredibly angry with God at that time. Sorry. It's quite a personal story. But I was angry with God. I hadn't actually seen my brother in a number of years because we could not afford to go. And I was like, but I'm giving all these doctors all this hard-earned money for tests that they could not solve the bottom of. Why was I sick? Why was all of this happening to us? And I must say, it is in those moments that you lean very deep into who God is. And I'm so thankful for people teaching me to just dig into his word. And a friend of mine said, just, read Job. It's not exactly the most encouraging book. But what it helped me to do was, as it comes to the end, and if you've read Job, you know it, and he's there questioning God at the end, the foolish man, and God says, how can you question me? And he goes through everything that he's done. And I looked at my life and I saw every single page of my life was written with the grace of God. And I thought, well, how can I be angry with him? How can I actually, what will I say to God one day that you didn't look after me? I can't accuse him of anything. He has been more than good to me. He has been so gracious. He has denied me nothing, not even his son. I'm just mindful of time, but I'm hoping I'm not taking too much to go through this. But what really helped is, and I think was an added pressure for me, so I knew these things, like whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And I had that laying very heavy on my heart because I thought, well, how am I meant to act in this moment? And I also felt very pressured because I felt like people were watching in and wanting me to respond in a way that looked really Christian. And kind of having your life in front of people and wanting to do the right thing, which is to glorify God. And I just, once again, did not know, well, what does that look like in this moment when it's really hard? And I know what people are thinking, and I know they're going to, and maybe I don't know what people are thinking. It's also in your own head. But kind of feeling the pressure of this, forgetting who God is, and you read these verses like in everything without complaining or arguing, that you may become blameless and pure children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation in which you shine like stars in a universe as you hold out the word of life. I knew what God wanted me to do. Hold out the word of life, shine like stars, not complain, not argue. Those are tough things. I remember our senior pastor's wife saying to me, Leekie, if you ever need to talk about it, you can always come to me. I said, I don't think you want me to talk to you. She said, no, I do. I said, I might use language that I'm afraid to use. And she's like, I can take it. But I think, and this was said before, I think reaching into God's word and knowing that in everything, rejoice in the Lord always, not sometimes, not when it's good, not when you understand everything, not when you're trying to make the right decision and feel guilty, Rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God that transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Praise be to God for that. And I must say that has been true in my own experience as well. That as I brought these things to him, and I must say, I was quite surprised that I was so upset about falling ill and then obviously facing infertility. I was surprised because I had friends who had gone through the same thing and I was quite judgmental. And as soon as I went through it, there were sort of questions in my mind I never thought I would actually have. I walked into my house and I thought, oh, but who will I give this to? And I was going to work and I thought, well, why am I working? What does it even matter? And I worked through those things, but even recently it comes up again. My mother suffered a stroke a couple of years ago and I had to look after her. And I went down, looked after my mom and dad. They now live with me. And I thought, well, who's going to do that for me? And it's kind of those things that you kind of work through again, but it does underline that you haven't really understood. And he needs to teach you something. I love 2 Corinthians of how it talks about this Father. Our God is a Father of compassion and a God of all comfort. That is a God that we serve, the God who is near us and is full of compassion and comfort. He is a God of peace that is with us. So I want to leave with what really helped me and has been a constant encouragement to me. It's back to Matthew. When Jesus says these words, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, yet their heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? See how the lilies of the field grow? They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed as one of these. We have a God that is so compassionate, so kind, that he even cares for birds and the lilies and the grass. He cares for all of them. What about, imagine us. Somebody has sent his son to die for you and me. And yet that's what he says, like, oh, you of little faith. And I even said it to myself, oh, you of little faith. Just open your eyes and look outside what God is doing for things that have no value. How much more will he do for you? So this has been a great comfort to me, to know that actually he has called us to seek his kingdom first and his righteousness. And these other things will be given to you. He has been a God that has always been with me. Why will he not be with me then? And he will take me into glory because he has promised that he will. And for each of us, our stories are different. He's writing a different story for you. But he is as much penning that story as he is penning my own. And I don't know where it will end. And I don't know what he has in store. But I know that he is a God that intimately knows me, that intimately cares for me, that he is compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, that he cares for the lilies and the birds. Will he not also care for me? I can ground myself in that rock, because that is not a shaky rock, and know that he will take me to be with him. And so I pray that that would be the same for you too, that you would ground yourself in this rock, in this compassionate King that we serve, not in anything else. And also that you know that your ordinary story, because mine is a story like anybody's story, actually. It's just an ordinary story. But he is working out in our lives in the most extraordinary ways. And he will use you if you allow him to. And you will see his grace in every situation if you open your eyes to see it. So thanks be to the God that is compassionate and kind with us. And I hope that this will be an encouragement to your hearts, as it has been a reminder to my own of what a God we serve and how thankful we can be that we know him and can know him, though we are ordinary and he is extraordinary. But we can know him. I'm going to just close in prayer. Father, we just marvel at your work in our lives. We marvel at what a good and compassionate and loving and faithful God you are, that you are indeed slow to anger, that you are abounding in steadfast love, that you are the God of compassion and kindness. And as we see, not only in the pages of the Bible, we thank you, Lord, that we can know you and see you there, but we can see you, Lord, working out marvelously in our lives as well. That you are working out your plans and purposes for our lives in extraordinary ways. Father, thank you that as broken, ordinary people, we can draw to know you and to love you, though you are perfect. We pray that by your Spirit you would strengthen us, that you would strengthen us in our weeks, in our families, in the lives that we have, that we would be shining lights for you. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for his death for us. Thank you for the life that we can have in you. I pray for all these women here, Lord, that you would help them to see your love and your mercy and your grace in their stories, and that you would help them to share that with others. that others would come to know and love you too. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.